All right. Hello, and welcome back to Real Seekers. I'm your host, Dale, the Real Seeker. And today we have a special treat for you guys. We have a special guest, Dr. Andrew Silverman, on. Hey, Andrew, how's it going?
Very well, thank you. Yes, thank you for having me on the show. I really appreciate that.
No problem. Thank you for being on. And of course, I'm joined by my co-host Tyler Fowler. So, hey, Tyler, what have you been up to on your show, Faith Unaltered? If you want to let the audience know.
So I am actually going on hiatus for the month of July, and I know Dell and David are going. They've got a good. I think they've already got the month of July booked, don't you guys? For
Uh,
Faith Unaltered, anyway.
yeah, there's one week that we need to work out. So,
Okay. So yeah, other than that, I mean, I'm going to do a couple shows. So on the 8th, we've got Orthodox and Protestant dialogue that's happening about sola fide, or justification by faith alone. And then we are also on the 21st, another show that I'm going to be a part of is our own David Russell is going to be debating Roman Catholic apologist Louis Dizon over the topic of intercession of the saints. Other than that, I am done with podcasting for the month of July, and I'm going to spend some time with my family. So,
awesome. All right, cool. So obviously for today's topic, we're talking with Dr. Andrew Silverman here, and it's going to be on based on his book, A Burst of Conscious Light. And there's a bunch of topics in that, from the existence of God to the nature of consciousness and near-death experiences, and of course everyone's favorite on Real Seekers, the Shroud of Turin. Yeah, Andrew, if you don't mind, just before we get started into the topics, do you want to take some time to introduce the audience as to who you are, a bit about your background, and if you don't mind sharing something about your faith journey as well?
Sure. Well, I come from a medical background as a doctor, and I've also studied science, in particular physics. And I as a teenager, I was introduced to the subject of the shroud, what's now known as the Shroud of Turin, through a film, a documentary that was made by David Rolfe called The Silent Witness, in which there were several scientists who came at it completely open-minded and without any particular belief, but assuming when they got there that they'd find it to be some kind of painting or something, and were all completely amazed. These were people from Los Alamos Jet Propulsion Laboratory and so on, NASA. They were expecting, that's what they were expecting, and they found that there was no way that they could account for how the image could have got on there through any sort of means of any artist or anyone trying to fake it and so on. And the film ended with the discussion of how it could have got there, the image, and the scientists were saying it appears to have been caused by a short, intense burst of radiant energy. Now, from the dead body of the man that was wrapped in the shroud, and this started a lifelong journey of sort of scientific inquiry for me to try to understand how such a thing might be possible rationally. So without recourse to faith or dogma, but just looking at the evidence. And I come at this from I was born into Jewish ancestry, and so regarding faith as such, I'm not attached to any sort of institutionalized religion. But I believe that there is some truth in all of them. I don't think that any of the people who are now seen as the founders of those religions were necessarily intending to found institutions, but were as Jesus himself put it, he came to bear witness to the truth. And I believe that there is truth in all of them. And so that's really how my book happened, was because of my own personal journey and search into considering how such a thing could have happened as the image on the Turin Shroud, and what does that tell us about the nature of reality, the nature of human beings, and what our potential is, because after all, it was a human being that was in the shroud.
Awesome. All right, cool. Well, yeah, I think getting kind of straight into it, one of the things about your background as well that is that you do have a background in physics too. So I kind of would just start with kind of the existence of God in general. I know in your book you do have some parts talking about time and stuff like that. So, do you find, based on your physics knowledge, there are good reasons to believe in a God at all, or?
Well, of course, the word God means so many different things to different people. So I tend not to dwell on that on the word per se, but I do believe in a state of existence beyond time, beyond time and space, where all is one, and within that state, it would be all knowing. All knowledge would be contained within. And also, I mean, after all, when Jesus was criticized or questioned for using the word God in the same sentence as where he was referring to himself, he pointed out, is it not written, ye are gods and children of the Most High? That I think, and he was very careful that he didn't only talk about his Father, he spoke about our Father. And I believe that everything, he said, everything I can do, you can do also. I think that he was alluding to a state of being that can be arrived at through a pathway that he demonstrated when he said, love thy neighbor as thyself, that what we call God is the same as all of us reaching our perfect potential. So without any limit, and without limit, we're all one. It's that we are distinguished from each other by our own personal, individual histories of how we have become less than we could be, so to speak. And I believe that what the Man of the Shroud demonstrated is that a human being can lose all limit and become totally free.
All right, interesting. One thing that I kind of found interesting there when you talked about this, and it's beyond space and time, and
Mm-hmm.
so what? Are you familiar with like the different positions, like the A theory and B theory of time, and that sort of stuff, or?
Well, yeah, I mean, so the thing is that any notion of time is always, or space and space time is always separation. There always has to be separation to be time, and conversely, where all is one, then there's no time. In fact, there was one of the founders of quantum theory, Erwin Schrödinger,
Mhm.
pointed out that the fascinating thing about time is that in physics, then you could imagine that there could be the whole of the history of the universe from the Big Bang to the heat death. There's actually nothing in the laws of physics that states anything about a present or a flow of time. And yet, but he pointed out that the fascinating thing about consciousness, about the mind, is that it's always now, that now only exists because of the mind, and that because of that, it's actually, without a now, there's no time. And so consciousness is the creator of time. And he derived from that, and this is written in, he published this in his book, What is Life? And one can derive from that since time is a derivative of mind, that mind cannot be a derivative of time, and therefore has no beginning and no end. In other words, as sentient conscious beings, we must be eternal. And yet the universe, the physical universe, has a beginning, has a Big Bang. And so, and in that sense, time has a beginning. But if we don't have a beginning, then I wouldn't say use the word before. We don't exist before the universe, but we exist beyond the Big Bang, and in that state, we are all one. And I believe that's what Jesus alluded to. And in that state, there is no time, because there's no need for change or action that makes one moment different from the last.
Let me ask this kind of, so someone like William Lane Craig, and Tyler, I think you'll appreciate this because I'm going to tie this into theology a little bit, right? Like things like the incarnation and stuff. But so some people will say, well, look, if ultimate reality, whether it's God or not, you said that you think it is all knowing, it can't know that it's now in the same way that we do, because it can't know present tense propositions. And how does it relate
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, you see, the now is the fact of existence and awareness. Okay. What's different is that for us, our now is a changing now of impermanence. But that is it's so difficult to put into words, but we can sort of see it by implication and inference. The distinction between an eternal, perfect, and all-inclusive now, and a now where we have change and impermanence and separation. So it's not the now, it's not the consciousness that is the product of separation. It's the impermanence and the separation and the restriction and the limit which we have, and that what we might call God does not have that restriction, limit, ignorance, and so on, and it doesn't need to change.
Awesome, cool. Yeah, Tyler, I know you told me, general philosophy and existence arguments for the existence of God are not your forte, but do you have any follow-up questions or anything you want to probe about that general topic before we get into consciousness?
Not right now. I think I'm gonna just sit back and hang out, and then I'll jump in here in a little bit.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, cool. So yeah, I would like to move on to, okay, well, let's look at what we know about consciousness on the human level that we know. So yeah, just to kind of start it over to you, like what do you think is the nature of consciousness, and the mind matter continuum and stuff like that?
Thank you. Yes, I mean, now this is an interesting point, which I do allude to, I think, in my book, that when one tries to say, people say, oh, no one can actually define what consciousness is. But when you think about it, whenever we define what something is, we're doing so by comparing it to something else. Okay, so I can, define a table and chairs relative to each other and say what we do with them, and it's very difficult to compare consciousness to something else, because there is nothing else that is like it, because it is actually the fundamental base of all existence. And although we cannot define what consciousness is in sort of separate, concrete terms that we could sort of put into a computer, and the computer would then know what it is. All conscious beings know what it is, because they all experience it, and in fact, all that they experience is experienced through consciousness. So you see, and to the point about being aware, and this is the point that I was alluding to, that Schrödinger made, is that time being the product of consciousness also implies that through having awareness, we have awareness of options, and therefore we have freedom of choice. And that is why we're in the now. What one calls the past and the future, they all are part of now. Okay, because now is the only thing we ever experience, and the past is what has been defined through actions and choices and their concatenate implications, which often are not directly caused by them. So the butterfly flapping its wings causing the storm. The butterfly might argue, have chosen to flap its wings. It didn't choose to create a storm, but the storm happens. And so this is the nature of existence in a chaotic, limited, restricted universe that we're in, that there are things that happen that aren't necessarily chosen, they're not deserved, they're not punishments or rewards. They're just the consequences of a chaotic system which we've become subject to by being here. And the future also exists within the present, and exists in a form that's not yet fixed, and not yet fixed because choices can be made that can influence the future. Now, in terms of the mind matter continuum that I allude to in the book, it's interesting that through quantum theory, one can demonstrate that the properties of an object may not actually exist until they're observed, and this led many of the founders, including Eugene Wigner, to postulate that actually consciousness is fundamental in terms of allowing even physical existence to exist in the first place, and that rather than mind being a random product of a collection of atoms or cells in the brain, actually it's the other way around, that matter exists because consciousness exists. And I would argue that the consciousness existing in separation, as we all exist as separate individuals from each other, is the reason why space, time, and matter exists. And what people like Jesus have demonstrated is that the momentum of loving one's neighbor as oneself, as he put it, is the antidote to that separation. Because in the ultimate reality, if we come from a state of existence where we're all one, then our neighbor is ourselves. So it's just it's not a matter of what that one necessarily would need to have faith in order to believe, but what he said actually makes rational sense. And the point that I make in the book is that in order to understand how such a thing could have happened as the image that we see on the shroud, that one can consider that maybe it's not a coincidence that all the evidence points to the man of the shroud having been such a unique individual in terms of what he taught and how he lived, and that perhaps that what he was through how he what he did, what the potential that he achieved, is what made him totally dominant over atoms rather than the other way around. And that in achieving that status, that matter basically, and this is a point that the physicist David Bohm pointed out, matter is frozen light. Okay, that light is actually anything that is at for anything that is at the speed of light, and this is according to what Einstein demonstrated, that space and time in terms of separation don't apply if you're at the speed of light, because the origin and destination of the light beam is one and the same. There's no distance between them in space, and there's no distance between them in time. And so perhaps matter has happened, that light is frozen as a result of the limitations that we have taken on that divide us from each other, and that through what he achieved, he was able to unfreeze that light. And that this is a clue perhaps to how the burst of radiant energy that came from that body that was wrapped in the cloth, it's a clue to how it happened.
So that's a few interesting things there. I want to Okay, so let me start. You mentioned freedom, so I think this is something that Tyler will be interested in.
Mm.
First place, number one, would you say that you are a determinist or an indeterminist ultimately? And in terms of our choices,
Mm.
you mentioned that because we have an awareness of our choices, that's what makes us free. Um,
Uh, mm.
did I misunderstand? Yeah, go ahead and clarify.
Because we have an awareness of the available options. Sorry, maybe I'm being a bit pedantic here. Not just aware of the choices that we've made, but aware of potential choices that we could make. Whereas any object, including one that might be very complicated and one that might have so-called artificial intelligence, which I hope to come to later to demonstrate. As well, actually, I'm not the first to demonstrate it. It's actually Professor Roger Penrose has in his book the Emperor's New Mind. He demonstrates that basically artificial intelligence is in many ways a contradiction in terms. That to be intelligent, you must understand. To understand, you must be aware. So consciousness is a prerequisite for intelligence, true intelligence, which is intelligence is different from the processing of information. I might type some characters into a computer or a calculator, and an answer might come out at the end. 1 + 1 = 2, but the calculator isn't aware of the number 1 or addition or equals or 2, and yet the answer comes out. It's actually no more intelligent than an abacus. And
I just want to say we had a fan last night in our audience on our show last night saying that exact same thing that you were saying. So you're in good company here on Real Estate. Yes,
excellent, thank you.
Sorry to interrupt. Continue.
No, that's absolutely fine. So, and the point that that Schrödinger made, and he made it very well. If consciousness has no beginning, then we can't manufacture it. Just as I would argue, it can't be created either. So I don't believe we have a beginning, and or an end. And so, in that sense, I would argue that because we have this consciousness, which is a connection to an eternal state of being, then that's what allows us to be aware of options in order to choose between them.
Awesome. Yeah, Tyler, I'll bring in. Do you have any questions or things you want to talk about consciousness or the nature of freedom as Andrew understands it?
So I would like to ask, given what is your view about animals? Do you believe that like animals have some form of intelligence? Because it sounds like to me anyway, and please correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, that because there's a difference between, like you said, intelligence and something or someone typing in keys to a computer. A monkey, for example, can be taught how to type, right?
Sure.
So would you see that there's a fundamental difference between humans and animals, and then we can maybe even shift into artificial intelligence, like there's a difference between AI and even animals at that point?
Okay. So, sorry, I don't think I made it very clear. I wasn't talking about what is doing the typing. I was talking about what is being typed upon. So I'm talking about the computer itself. That even if you get a robot to type on it, still neither the robot nor the computer is conscious.
Right.
The illustration I was using is that if I move the objects that constitute an abacus around, that the abacus isn't conscious of what I'm doing. In my mind, I might be aware of a calculation, but the object isn't consciously performing a calculation, and neither is a computer, whatever is typing on it, and whether or not what is typing on it is conscious or not.
Okay.
So I'm saying that I'm arguing that consciousness is a prerequisite for intelligence, but that doesn't mean that all that is conscious is necessarily intelligent. And it also, there's a big difference perhaps also between intelligence and wisdom, but I would argue that that intelligence is, or lack of it, is a continuum that from lack of to very intelligent, if you like, that there is some degree of, I have no reason to think that animals don't have consciousness.
Okay.
And lots of animals seem to be have varying degrees of intelligence. Crows and parrots and monkeys and various other creatures can, they can learn, they can innovate to a certain degree. But so my point is that even an ant is completely, in being alive, is a completely different kettle of fish, a completely different on a completely different of a completely different status to a computer or a machine. The problem is, I think that as time goes on, they're going to, what people are calling artificially intelligent, they'll begin to make it shaped like a human. They'll give it eyes, and they'll give it, something soft on the material on the outside that looks like skin. And people get fooled. People think if it looks like a person and it speaks like a person, then it is a person. But there's a difference. I try to see it very simply. It's the difference between something and someone. Okay, so any computer, whether we call it artificially intelligent, whether it looks like a person, whether it can answer questions in such a way that you think you're talking to a person, none of that makes a difference. It's still something. It's not someone. And that someone, that someoneness, for want of a better word, that consciousness has no beginning and therefore cannot be manufactured. No matter how complicated you make a program or an algorithm, it's ultimately a string of ones and zeros. That's all it can ever be. And my contention is that it doesn't matter how long you make the string of ones and zeros, it will never be someone. It will always be something. And you are not a string of ones and zeros. You can be, and none of our listeners or viewers are that either, because if they were, they wouldn't be experiencing that listening and viewing. There wouldn't be someone who was experiencing that. So this is the point I often make, that people who say that consciousness is a result of self-awareness, self-reference, it's about anything that processes information about itself will suddenly wake up and be conscious. Or just get a film camera and point it at a mirror, so it's processing information about itself. Does it become someone? Is it conscious? Is it an act of murder to unplug it? I don't think so.
Right. No, thank you for that clarification. And so it would seem like then humans, because consciousness, awareness is without end, without beginning, humans could never get to a point or state to be able to manufacture, to be able to make a computer actually aware or a robot actually conscious. Is that fair?
Yeah, in fact, that I go further and to say that consciousness cannot begin in any form at all. It cannot be created or manufactured. You can simulate something that might look to someone as though it's conscious, if that person might be able to be fooled by that. But the thing that simulation is itself still something. It's not someone, and it's not experiencing that person who's being fooled.
It's a counterfeit.
It's an object. It's just an object. It's something. It's an artifact of only atoms and matter. And matter, as I was saying, and as I believe quantum theory backs up, only exists because of consciousness. But the other way around doesn't work. You can't make consciousness out of matter, but if you're conscious, you can make water into wine. You can do things to matter. In fact, all matter exists because of consciousness.
Okay, fair enough. So thank you for that. My last question then, and then Dale, you can take back over. Is consciousness the only thing in your mind that separates humans from say, a computer? Or are there other processes? Are there other aspects of humanity that is other than consciousness that separates us from all other objects that are not aware of their self?
Okay. Well, I suppose it depends how fully we expand on consciousness. I mean, by consciousness, I'm including both the aspect of being aware and the aspect of freedom of choice. Now, what we have, each of us has our own individual memories, character, sort of tendencies and likelihood of what choices we're likely to make based on all of those things that make us different.
Mhm.
But what actually makes us the same as each other is actually, I believe, is the fundamental ground of existence itself. That it's not a process, and yet without it there would be no such thing as processes or space-time or matter within which those processes would operate. To my mind, to say consciousness actually implies the infinite, the absolute, and the all. So it's difficult really to say that there's something else, because it's all encompassing.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Silverman. Go ahead, Dell.
Yeah, I did notice. I think it's a question. He says query from Brendan in the audience. So I'm not sure. So query if fall resulted in quantum collapse in terms of a consciousness event. I'm not sure what he means, but if the fall is Brendan,
That,
if you
that's what it almost sounds like, Dell. Did the fall result in quantum collapse in terms of a conscious event?
so once they chose the Apple, quantum collapse took place. I guess. Like, yeah. What?
Well, I mean, of course, I would say that our existence in limitation and our the separatization, the division of our individuality, one from the other, and the realm within which that exists, is the consequence of a choice that didn't have to happen, but clearly has, because we're here. So if one could call that fall, if it, definitely one could argue that the state of being without limit, of being purely eternal, without needing to have change and separation, death and separation, division, and so on, and what's now known as the second law of thermodynamics, that Jesus referred to as moths, rust, and thieves, that characterize this physical universe, that is I would argue the result of choice, yes, and not something that was imposed upon us, that we were put here, but that we've done it to ourselves.
Gotcha. All right, perfect. So, yeah, is there anything else about the nature of consciousness in general that we haven't asked you about that you want us to talk about before we get into the near-death experiences part?
I think probably we'll find that you'll see that we can talk about any subject, but I'll probably still be considering it in terms of consciousness. But a near-death experience is an experience within consciousness that does give us clues to the nature of consciousness as well. So I suppose the answer to that is yes. There is, I think, more we can discuss about consciousness, and NDEs is a great way to do it. So yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Okay, well, yeah. With that said, let's get into NDEs then. So, let's start off with the general question: what are NDEs, and yeah, just what are they in general?
Yeah, well, I'm very fortunate that two of the greatest researchers in the world on NDEs were kindly actually wrote on my the cover notes of my book. So Dr. Eben Alexander and Dr. Pim van Lommel, and it's based on their research and people like them, like Dr. Peter Fennick and others, Sampani, Dr. Sampania, and so on, that I'm basing what the nature of what happens in NDEs. So they're the ones who have done the sort of field research, as it were. Although, you know, I of course have met some patients who, following resuscitation from cardiac arrest, have had experiences. But the basically what happens is that during a cardiac arrest, the heart stops, and within a few seconds after that, all the brain waves go flat. There's basically no discernible electrical activity in the brain. Now, a large proportion of people, when they're resuscitated following that cardiac arrest, will recall having had an amazing experience during that time, when, according to what's normally seen as established, you know, neurophysiology and so on, they shouldn't even have been conscious, let alone laying down new memories, let alone actually observing events that were happening. And this includes even blind people who have had NDEs that have said that they could see, and they weren't familiar with having seen anything, but they could see from above the body that the resuscitators were working on. They were looking down and could see and hear what was going on, and could recount accurately specific details of it that there's no way they could have known about unless they were conscious and experiencing it and seeing it and hearing it, despite being blind anyway, while their brain was incapable of any activity. So this has led people who started off with a completely open mind to it, such as the researchers that I mentioned before, to come to the conclusion that consciousness cannot be made by the brain, and the brain is not a prerequisite for consciousness. And it's a bit like in some ways like a radio. You know, that we switch the radio on and, you know, you might hear your favorite song being played. But does anyone really think that the radio is the composer or the singer of that song? Of course they don't. But yet somehow people have got this idea that their brain, this object in the we call it jelly-like object. I think the North American term is jello-like object. That is in our inside our cranial vault, that is somehow producing all the richness of all of our experience and all the emotion and all the sense of what we all mean to each other, what your family mean to you, is somehow, according to some people, is just all it is. It just consists of electrical signals going backwards and forwards. Well, the near-death experiences proves that that's not true. It proves that you take the brain out of the equation, and your consciousness, your perception, your scope for analysis and feeling and emotion is still there. In fact, not just still there. Somehow, from what they describe, it's much richer without a brain. It's much clearer. It's more all-encompassing, and there's more sense of access to wisdom within that near-death experience. Now, apart from, one of the fascinating things about near-death experiences, apart from what I was describing earlier, which they call the veridical experiences, where the near-death experiencer perceives things that they couldn't have physically known about through their body, and it's verified later that that was accurate. Another fascinating thing about it is what they describe as the light that they experience, and how they describe it, that in that light was all love, all compassion, and all wisdom, that any questions they had, somehow the answers were there. And that they felt that light was somehow loving them and welcoming them. And that's fascinating from the questions about the nature of consciousness, the connection between mind and matter, and of course tying us back into that moment that happened in a tomb in Judea around 2,000 years ago. Well, I believe that's where it happened, and I believe that's what the evidence points to. That ties the whole thing together, and it's where I go into great depth in the book to consider, what is light, and as I say, how light is in terms of physics is what unravels the knots of separation in terms of from the perspective of being light. So I'm not saying that you switch your electric light on and suddenly you become enlightened. But what I'm saying is that if rather than being requiring to have physical bodies made of atoms, that if we were more like light, then separation is not so relevant to us. It's interesting that the choice of words that someone once said, "I am the light," and the sense that people have, as I say, in that light is everything is one, and they're welcomed back to the light as if it's their home, and so this is my point, that light is the connection between points that are separate. We have built our own prison of division and separation through restriction, all the things that divide, whether it be selfishness, racism, nationalism, sexism, anything that we have in our minds and in our choices that we make, and ignorance in our minds that is there to generate those, to influence those choices. Anything that divides one human being from another and restricts us to just being ourselves in our limited sense of being ourselves. It's interesting that also there's one quote where Jesus spoke about that each child has their angel in heaven. Interesting that he was referring to that. If each human being was once a child, remember that there's something about us that he was alluding to. And as I say, I think it was perhaps one of the wisest human being that ever walked the earth. But what he said, I believe it all makes sense rationally. It's not that I have faith or dogma about it, but he basically referred to the second law of thermodynamics about 1900 years before physicists discovered it, and as the defining characteristic of this world, that everything rots. But he also pointed to another state of existence where there is eternity, and when you don't have pain, death, corrosion, and decay. So, but I would argue that actually that makes perfect rational sense, and the evidence is there from near-death experiences that this is very real. It's something that can be studied empirically. Now, the thing about that some scientists would say, empiricism means it has to be something that you can put in a test tube or look at under a microscope. But really, if you take it down to its actual fundamental nature, empiricism is about observation. Okay, now people who have near-death experiences are observing what's happening. They're making observations about it, and they'll say, "Oh yes, but that's subjective. It can't be verified or reproduced." But it's reproduced because it happens so many times, and it's verified because they have veridical experiences that they see things. There's an anecdote that's often quoted about there was a consultant, a medical doctor who was seeing a patient who had been resuscitated, and this consultant was, I don't know if they were agnostic or atheist or what, but they believed that that death was the end and so on. As from what I understand, but then this patient said that while they were being resuscitated, after their near-death experience had began, that they had an experience of looking at the hospital building from above, and they saw a slipper on a ledge several stories up. They'd never been to that patient had never been up there, and the doctor in question actually went up there and went up to that level on the building, and sure enough, there was what the patient had described to them. So I would argue that there is actual scientific evidence that backs up the notion that death is not the end. The brain does not make your mind. That your mind cannot be created. Mind is perhaps too limited a term, but your being cannot be created or destroyed, and you are eternal, and there is no limit to what we can achieve.
It's so interesting that whenever you were talking about this light, that near-death experience, people they would see this light, and the instant that you had mentioned that this light, or they described this light as loving, I believe you said, it brought me back, and I don't know if you're familiar, Dr. Silverman, with the Eastern Orthodox concept of the Tabor light, or the uncreated light. Gregory Palamas in the 14th century, he's kind of known for really establishing this, not doctrine, I would say, but just teaching in essence. Are you familiar with that concept, or not so much?
I suppose the concept is, I'm not familiar with that historical sort of concept having been discussed by that person, but I suppose the fact that, did you say the creative or non-created light?
Yeah, they call it the uncreated light. So this is a light that maybe even was revealed a little bit on Mount Tabor in Jesus's transfiguration.
Yes. I wasn't aware that particular scholar had stated that, but I think something similar is in my book. And one of the points that I always make, though, is that actually a good friend of mine once said, everyone has their own brand of nonsense. Each human being does. And I agreed with him, but I would take that a bit further and say, on the other hand, no one has their own brand of truth. So anything that I say that might have any deep truth to it is can't by its nature be original. That truth was always there, and I'm sure there will have been many other people over in the course of history, if it is true. Obviously, if whatever isn't true in what I say, I can take the blame for that. But if anything I'm saying is true, then I don't own it.
Well, and fair enough.
Just a quick joke, and I'll let you keep going.
Yeah.
But so Tyler, just so you know, going forward, I'm going to be quoting Dr. Andrew Silverman that Eastern Orthodoxy is a brand of nonsense. So
no, I didn't say that.
That's good. I like it.
But yeah, sorry, if you have more questions, go ahead, and then I have a few of my own after you're done.
Well, yeah, go ahead. I was just gonna make a comment and say, that I trust me, I understand the concept of, we don't own truth or anything like that. I think we do very much make it relevant in our time. And so thank you for that. I really appreciate it. I think you're doing that right now. So thank you for that. But go ahead, Dale.
Awesome. Okay, yeah. So the first thing I wanted to ask you in terms of what NDEs are and stuff, how would you, so you kind of described your take on NDEs. What about out of body experiences? How do those relate or compare to NDEs in your books?
Yes, I don't really go into great depth, or I'm not sure if I even mention them at all directly, because the relevance of NDEs to me is that they happen while the brain has no activity at all. So that's the significance of them to me. They contain more relevance and value to me in terms of what they can teach us. So that doesn't sort of say that I'm not disputing that out-of-body experiences happen. They're just not really such vital evidence for behind what I'm saying. Actually, because what I'm suggesting is that fundamentally that matter itself and everything about matter is fundamentally subject to mind or consciousness. You might say that a grain of sand of consciousness could move a mountain, if you like. That actually, that it is so fundamental that I'll give you an example. I was at an inaugural lecture of the first UK professor of parapsychology. And in that, this was about just over 30 years ago in Scotland when I was a medical student. And he was sort of reviewing all the evidence for what's known as extrasensory perception and mind over matter. And there is a lot of evidence, and for people who want a more contemporary, excellent summary of that evidence, you can read people like Dean Radin, for example, and sort of very scholarly work that he has done on demonstrating this. Well, it's just I think it's beyond reasonable doubt. It's been demonstrated that these things exist. But when there was question time at the end of the talk, I just put my hand up and I just made the point, which is a little bit banal perhaps, and it's a very easy point to make. But in raising my arm to be permitted to ask this question, am I not proving the existence of mind over matter? If we make a decision and our body follows what our decision has been, then our mind has influenced matter. But actually, I would take it further than that, and say that when we talk about extrasensory perception, what we mean is all perception. Okay, because senses don't perceive anything. The example I gave you of the camera that's filming its own reflection, it doesn't see its reflection. It's just an object processing information about it. Senses don't see anything. And this, again, I'm not being original here. This is in a text called the Upanishads, that is thousands of years old, from India, where they refer to the author refers to the eye of the eye and the ear of the ear, that the eye doesn't see. Okay, the brain doesn't see either. You see, but you are not the eye and the brain or the brain, and that's what the NDEs demonstrate. So all perception is extrasensory perception, because senses perceive nothing. All actions that we make are all mind over matter. So it stands to reason to me that things like out-of-body experiences are possible, but I don't dwell on that because it's not it's not a particular strand of evidence that points to, that demonstrates what the point that I wanted to make. Whereas NDEs demonstrate it more because they happen while the brain is completely incapable of anything.
Yeah, I totally agree. My interest in NDEs, I learned about them from Dr. Gary Habermas, who I'm sure you know his work in NDEs and stuff. So, but yeah, veridical NDEs for me is what really piques my interest. And so I was glad you mentioned a couple cases. Let me just throw out a skeptical counter response, though.
Sure, please.
So, you say we have this scientific evidence, but hasn't there been a number of controlled studies that have been done, and all of these have failed? There was at least 5 that I know of. I don't know if there's been more since, but how do we make sense of this? Why are these controlled scientific studies failing in terms of NDEs?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's to do with the perhaps to do with the way that the studies are designed, so that they're looking at particular objects that might not necessarily be so relevant or of significance to the person who's having the experience, to perhaps to notice it. I mean, in a way, the fact that there was even consciousness or memories being laid down at all during the experience is proof enough, because we shouldn't be able to be conscious or develop new memories during that time. And as I say, there is so much evidence from what people have reported, and that's been verified by the medical and nursing staff who were in attendance at the time, including many who had no axe to grind, or no particular reason to want to believe it. In fact, most of the NDE researchers came to it that way, just not because they had a belief that they wanted to look into, but because they saw the evidence and that drew them into it. Of course, in Dr. Eben Alexander's case, he actually had the experience himself. And I believe, if I remember correctly from what Dr. Van Lommel told me, he in his work as a cardiologist, of course, that involves dealing with patients who are liable to, who might have cardiac arrests, and through his expertise and his colleagues' expertise, be resuscitated from it. And it was from what those resuscitated patients, again, ones who before they had their NDE, many of them had no particular belief in existence beyond death, but the NDE was the evidence. And I suppose eventually we're all going to have perhaps an NDE and a DE, so we'll be able to see for ourselves.
Awesome. Yeah, cool. And that kind of reminds me, I had Dr. a while, I think at least two and a half years ago or something like that. I had Dr. Bruce Grayson on, who's a recognized authority in near-death experiences. And one thing, so I wanted to ask you, just as I asked him, okay, coming from the person who might be a little bit skeptical about NDEs and stuff like that, can you kind of lay out what you think some of the main naturalist type explanations are, and why they don't work in explaining some of these veridical cases and stuff? So
sure. Well, I mean, the most common one that people say is that it's happens as a response in the dying brain to oxygen deprivation and so on. But that's just not what we see. Sorry, in any other context, and the also that the brain just isn't active, so it's not possible for it to produce experiences while being completely a static object that's having no activity.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I was just saying that's Susan Blackmore, the dying brain hypothesis.
Yes.
So, all right, cool. So yeah, Tyler. Over to you, Tyler. We can finish off the NDEs if you've got questions, and then we'll transition to the Shroud of Turin.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Dr. Silverman, I would just like to ask, since we were talking a little bit about resuscitation and resuscitation patients, being a medical doctor yourself, do you see a categorical difference between the claims about the resurrection of Jesus versus and I don't want to say simple, because resuscitation isn't simple by any stretch of the imagination, but a categorical difference between what happened to Jesus versus being dead 3 days, 3 nights in the tomb, versus what happens to people who are brought back to life that haven't been dead for that quite a amount of time. Another case that can be referenced that's similar to Jesus's is Lazarus, for example. So would you see a categorical difference between those two claims versus the things that happen with resuscitation patients that have been deceased for maybe, a few minutes to even an hour or so.
Yep, that's an easy one to answer. Yes, I do see a categorical difference. It's not the same at all. It's not. In fact, that talking in medical terms, you can't resuscitate someone after after whether it was, I'm not sure if it was thought to be 2 or 3 days. If it's the third day, it may be more like 2. But either way, just the longest that resuscitation can happen is in cases of drowning and hypothermia and so on, but still it's way less than that, and there's no that context doesn't apply to that particular individual. And I only consider this as a possible thing to discuss, because we have to account for how this image got on the cloth. And remember, this is a dead body that was in that. And incidentally, my good friend, and I like to call him my mentor for on forensic matters related to the Shroud, Dr. Gilbert Lavoie, who's done some amazing empirical work, and he pointed this out to me, that it's a lot of the things that he's pointed out are so simple and obvious once I've heard them, but basically we know he was dead when he was wrapped in the shroud, because otherwise the shroud would be covered in blood. Anyone who's worked as I have in accidents and emergency departments, I think you call them emergency rooms, and seen people with scalp lacerations that we can see there's evidence that he had. If you're alive, it bleeds really heavily. Of course, the bleeding stops once the circulation stops, and that's the point that Gilbert pointed out to me, that the simplest evidence for to settle the question of was he actually dead when he was wrapped is that. And yet the other point that I realize again through his research, but then through looking at his research analytically and considering the pros and cons and so on, and not being able to find flaw in it, is that there are two different events here. One is the transfer of material which formed the bloodstains through a simple contact process, which is very easy to understand, that the cloth touched the body, there were still damp, and his experiments showed that the transfer to form bloodstains can happen within, depending on the environment and humidity and so on, can happen up to 90 minutes after the blood was shed.
Oh wow.
Okay, but not after that, because it dries. But it's a simple contact process, and due to that contact process, the blood, or the serum, I should say, which is stained red because there are still some red blood cells there, but that will, as any liquid would do, it soaks into the cloth, whereas the image was a completely different thing. And the image, as has been demonstrated by the STERP team in their empirical research, that the blood stains happened first, and the image happened at some point after that, because there isn't the image that you can clearly see this from looking at where the image is and where the blood stains are. And so but not only are they two separate events, one of which happened after the other, but the image is a surface phenomenon, and we can be quite precise about it, as Dr. Di Lazzaro has pointed out, that it's 200 nanometers in thickness, okay, which is 1/5000th of a millimeter is how thick the actual image, and it's not anything that has been chemical that has been added to the cloth. It's a chemical change in the cloth that is very similar to, almost identical to what happens when paper is exposed to sunlight and turns yellowish.
Mhm.
Okay, it's oxidation and dehydration of the cellulose in the linen fibrils that causes this, and only right on the surface. And only of that tiny thickness. And the fascinating thing that he pointed out is that, I'll talk about Dr. Lavoie now, is that if you look at the bloodstains and look at the image, they don't quite coincide, because you've got bloodstains out on the sides of the face that would make sense if the cloth had been draped over. But those bloodstains are superimposed on the image of the hair, and also there's what he calls off-image bloodstains from the elbow and so on. And if the cloth had been draped around a recumbent supine corpse or cadaver lying down in the cloth, lying down on the tomb, then we would expect several things. We would expect that when you look at the image with the cloth straight, then it should be distorted, because it's been wrapped around the face. The face should be wider. The image of the face should be wider. And you would also expect that the hair should be behind him, spread out with gravity, but just behind him anyway. And also you would expect to see flattening of the soft tissues of, for example, the calves and the buttocks and so on, which is just simply not there. And people say, oh, but rigor mortis would have stopped that. Well, actually, firstly, rigor mortis is a temporary phenomenon, and it lasts for a shorter amount of time in people who have been subject to violent death. In violent death, rigor mortis occurs more, and by violent I mean that, you know, the pain and the muscle tension that would have been happening because of that pain and that suffering that he went through. So rigor mortis would have set in more quickly than normal, and also it would have resolved more quickly. So definitely by 36-48 hours after, there wouldn't have been any rigor mortis present. But also but that one could say, people might say, oh, but how do we know when the image formed? So, okay, fair enough. So that argument is not such a strong one. But the stronger argument, the more significant one, is that rigor mortis only affects muscle. It doesn't affect skin or subcutaneous tissue. So if you, in a post-mortem or autopsy, whatever we call it, the body is in rigor mortis and it's flat on the slab, there'll still be flattening, because there's the skin, there's the what we call the two layers of fascia, which are the around the muscle tissue, and also the subcutaneous fat. That doesn't have rigor mortis. That would be flattened by gravity if you're lying flat. We don't see that on the shroud. We see that the hair is down on his shoulders, not behind him, and there's no flattening. And so it looks as though when the image formed, that the man of the shroud was upright. He was vertical, but not standing up, because you can see that the feet are on two different levels. It's as though the image suggests, if we look at it empirically, okay, it provides evidence that at that moment that the image formed, this body was vertical, upright, and somehow suspended above the ground, and that the cloth was relatively flat in front of and behind him, such that when we look at the cloth flat, we don't see distortion of the image that we would expect to have seen had it been sort of draped or tied or wrapped around a supine dead body.
So I don't mean to interrupt, but so are you saying, like, the person in the shroud is almost sitting up, or because
No,
you said he's not standing? Go
he's
ahead.
no, sorry. He's vertical, so not sitting. He's all in one flat plane. That the legs
Okay.
are down, hanging down, but not they're not on the ground because the feet are on different levels. It's as though he's in the upright vertical position as though standing, but the feet aren't on the ground. So he's
Oh,
actually in the air, which is
like
interesting.
levitating.
Yeah, which
Okay.
is interesting when we look at the anecdotal reports of all the evidence pointing to the. I'm convinced personally, coming at it from a neutral standpoint, that the evidence points to the man of the shroud being the historical Jesus of Nazareth, that they're the same person,
Okay.
and that there are reports. It's only using sort of 20th and 21st century technology and analytical techniques that we see the evidence, or arguably 19th in the sense of Secondo Pio with his photograph, but I don't think he saw this until more recently. So it's been seen that now we can see that there's evidence on the shroud that this man was. That there was a burst of light that came, a radiant energy that came from the body, and also that he was vertical and suspended above the ground. Things that in medieval times couldn't have been known that information was on the shroud, and a forger wouldn't know how to put it in, so that
Sure.
20th century technology would reveal this, and yet that this is congruent. It fits with the historical reports of what was seen to happen, that he was seen, as you pointed out, that he was seen at what's known as the Transfiguration, and perhaps at other times as well, that there was a light that was so bright, and yet it wasn't burning people's eyes, which is another clue. But then also that he was seen to rise above the ground, and he was seen to, at certain instances, act like his weight was, if not completely gone, definitely greatly diminished, if he was able to walk on water without falling through it. And there is another clue to the thesis that I set out in the book, is that he wasn't the only person who's said to have walked on the water, that Peter did as well. And what was how did that work? Now, and is there a clue to it in the fact that at one moment Peter is said to have been suspended above the water, and then at another, when due to what was happening in his mind, he began to sink. That and bear in mind that Jesus taught that all the things you see him do, you also can do, and that perhaps that our mind is, if you like a valve that allows or disallows this light through us, and not. I'm not arguing that it's a case of a simple switch that someone said, right, I want the light, I want to make the spoon bend, I want to do a miracle. I don't think that. My personal analysis of what Jesus is said to have done, and not just Jesus, there are other people. There were some of his disciples, but also other people in history, both before and after him, that have been reported to have been able to, heal the sick and so on, with and do lots of other things. And also, for example, the Buddha, who was 500 years before him, is often depicted with light around him and so on. But I think the great clue, if you look at all of those things that Jesus did that people call miracles, I don't call them supernatural. I would say that he was the most natural human being I can think of, and that I and most other human beings perhaps are subnatural because we're less than that through what we are and what we do. But that is the natural way to be, and that it would all fit together and make sense if you consider the context of all those things that he did. So, for example, there were people around him who were hungry. Food appeared. Okay, there were people who were in danger of drowning. on the lake, and the water was stilled. That
Mhm.
all of it is a process, not of like a magician wanting to do magic tricks or
Right.
wanting to be spectacular, or wanting to prove anything to anyone.
Mhm.
It's just, I believe, a sign of how much he cared. That people who care that much can do that, and that, but the clue is in the word "that much," because if we are, as long as we do contain things that, or limitations, restrictions, as I say, selfishness. I gave examples of them, racism, or anything that forbids us from learning from each other and recognizing the oneness of all humanity and of all sentience.
Yeah.
And by limiting us to ourselves, then we can't do that. We can't do it, not because God doesn't let us, but because we don't let us.
Mm. I really appreciate and enjoy what you're saying, and it's interesting because last night we were talking about this concept of well, the East, they call it theosis, right? Becoming like God in a very real in a very real sense. Protestants would say sanctification is the same thing, becoming like Christ. And I would just add what I talked about last night is that the more that we engage with the things that Jesus engaged with, for example, like you were saying, feeding the homeless, just being loving, doing to others as you would have them do unto you. I think that's key in what Jesus taught and one of the fundamental pillars of his teaching. But you're right. This is what happens whenever we engage in those types of activities versus the other selfish,
Yeah.
the things that are just full of hate. We diminish ourselves in a sense, and do harm to ourselves whenever we do those types of things. I believe
I
anyway.
think the key is the mind, though, rather than the specific action. So, for example, if a politician before an election feeds a few homeless people because he thinks he's going to win some
Just trying
votes,
to get some votes. Yeah,
it's still good that they've been fed, and I
sure.
wouldn't dispute that at all. But as long as we still have the restrictions aren't necessarily taken away by the action. By physically doing an action, if
Hmm.
within our minds and in our hearts the restriction is still there, then we haven't changed.
So intent is key.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think in intent and lack of, it's we have the natural state of consciousness, I think, is to be all knowing, but we have become ignorant, and
Mm.
it's a case of shedding the ignorance to some extent, and all restrictions are that make us less than we could be are a form of ignorance. I mean, it goes without saying that racism is a form of ignorance. I
Yeah.
think selfishness is also a form of ignorance. That it's a case of that we don't understand or know that our neighbour is ourselves, and it's not a case of intellectually perceiving that fact and saying, right, I've got that now. So right now, where's that spoon? I want it to bend. It's not a case of even the intention. Not to, the, it's not. That's what I think that when asked about what his purpose was, what he was trying to do, he
Hmm.
didn't say, "I've come to do spectacular things," and he just said, "I've come to bear witness to the truth." And if we really knew the truth, then we wouldn't want to be, we wouldn't be selfish, we wouldn't be all of those things. That we are ignorant as long as we are those limited things. Whatever is going on intellectually in our minds, it's about what is in the heart, and what we are is our being as well.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you for that explanation, Dr. Silverman. I really appreciate it. Dell?
Yeah, cool. Yeah, no. So I just want to bring it in. So obviously, you guys have gotten into a lot of the details on the shroud and how you see the image formation mechanism going and that sort of thing. Just before we get into that, I just want to ask you about strictly the historicity of the shroud, because you think it's authentic. It goes back to Jesus and that.
Mm.
Now, what are some of the evidences that convinced you that it is, in fact, historically authentic?
Yes. Well, to start with, I mean, the what we have to take the 1 point that would be taken against it being so. We have to we can't talk about the authenticity of the shroud without mentioning the carbon dating. Otherwise, that will be the elephant in the room.
You stole
And
my you stole my follow up.
and there again, this is nothing original that I'm saying. I would direct listeners and viewers to the great work of Joe Marino and his late wife, and the scientific research that their realization sort of inspired, really, in through what the peer-reviewed published scientific paper of Raymond Rogers, amongst other research, that really lays the light to the carbon dating. In fact, I was a medical student doing a what we call intercalated science degree during my medical studies, and so during that time I was reading Nature, the journal that the carbon dating was published in every week, because that was part of my it was there in the staff room where and I used to read it, and I spotted something in the actual data. I'm not the only person to have spotted it, by the way. That in the actual statistics, where the three different laboratories data was laid out together with what's the sort of error bars, if you like, the two standard deviations above, that it showed that it looked as though that two of the different labs had samples that had different ages. Okay. And this all makes sense. I later realized through, the reading Joe Marino's work, that, of course, if it's been rewoven with much more recent material, then different parts of it are going to have different amounts of that material. But it's fascinating that the actual, published paper from the carbon dating study actually itself provides evidence for that. So, but sorry, I don't want to digress too much on that. But in terms of what points it to being, that we can see forensically that this is a victim of Roman crucifixion. Okay, which this isn't something that was done, by other cultures or groups of people, to the extent that it was done by the Romans. And more specifically, we can see that there have been pollen studies and various other things that point to it having been within a certain triangulated location that puts it sort of around Jerusalem, where at some point in its history, at least, that doesn't prove it originated there, but it proves it was there. Okay, in around March or April, because that's when those pollens were around. Now, if this was what would probably at that time in that location have been a Jewish victim of Roman crucifixion, okay, because this was Judea after all, then there's a very important clue on the shroud. You see, for most of the time when the Romans were crucifying the Jews there, pardon me, they were leaving them there on for people to see, and letting them rot, basically leaving them to the animals. But there was a particular period in time between what's the Common Era 86 and 66, okay, where at that time, there was some sort of compromise that was reached between the Romans and the people of Judea, that, because I'm not sure if you know, but it's part of the Jewish laws that when someone dies, they have to be buried very quickly. Okay, and the Romans, the compromise that they came to, the Romans didn't agree to stop crucifying people. Okay, but what they did agree to was that they would at least allow them to have a traditional Jewish burial, which it would seem is what happened in this case, because we don't see evidence of putrefaction and of the flesh having been all taken away by animals or anything like that. The evidence suggests this was a Jewish victim of, and by saying Jewish, I'm not referring to the belief systems of the person who was there, but I'm just talking about the culture and the ancestry, because it was someone who was in Judea at the time, that it was a Jewish victim of Roman crucifixion in around March or April, in somewhere near Jerusalem between the year 6 and 66, and that this is someone who had a cap of thorns placed upon his, a cap of sharp objects at least placed upon his head, and had been stabbed in the side. So, I mean, for me, it's and also that it's survived so long, and which, because of the how some of the people around Jesus in his time, did value him so highly, and recognize his uniqueness in what he taught and how he lived, that it wouldn't be surprising that they would keep it. But it wouldn't have probably been common knowledge at the time, because unless you already knew that this image was what the Greeks call akeiropoietos, not made by human hands. It hadn't been it hadn't been painted and so on, which the people who found it in the tomb, they knew that, because they got in there, and he had gone, and the shroud was still there, and it had this imprint on it, and so. But anything that was, if it had been like an icon or a painted image, then it may have been forbidden by the local religious laws. But actually, since it wasn't, it isn't. But anyway, so that would make sense of why it wasn't, made common knowledge at the time. So that in a nutshell, yeah, that's why I think it is actually the burial cloth of the historical Jesus of Nazareth.
I do have a question real quick, just following up with that. And forgive me if I miss this, if you've already said that, but just to reiterate, if you have, do you believe that the image was created on the shroud, or was on the shroud before or after the event, the resurrection event?
Again, going back to the empirical evidence that we have in that image, that, as I say, that the image wasn't formed from a supine lying flat on its back dead body, but it was a human form that was vertical and suspended above the ground. That somehow there was that burst of radiant energy that happened. So rather than before or after, I would think I could say scientifically, because this is scientific. It's scientifically plausible, feasible, consistent. It's scientifically consistent with the evidence that we have to believe that possible that the image actually formed at a moment of what people might call a resurrection, that what
Okay.
was once a dead body was now life of some form, maybe not exactly in the form that that we are now. It's interesting that according to the historical accounts, that people who he'd known for years, they didn't actually realize who it was they were talking to.
Right.
There was
There's some kind of
something
transition.
different about him,
Yeah.
to how he had been, before, until they saw him breaking the bread. And as you probably know, the bread and wine at the Last Supper is actually, in Jewish tradition, that happens at every Passover, that bread and wine are a very unleavened bread and wine are a very important feature, and in fact it's called a Seder night. So effectively, the Last Supper was in some ways a Seder night.
Mm. So simultaneously, then, if there was a resurrection event, if that's what we want to call it, the image formed on the shroud during this time, however long it took.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
from I would. I don't know, but I mean,
Yeah.
I would speculate that it was instantaneous.
Okay.
That from the and this is again what I'm led to from empirical research that has been done at the Atomic Energy Institute, ENEA, in Frascati, Italy. One of the main researchers there, Dr. Paolo Di Lazzaro, has led lots of empirical research on how the changes that have happened in the linen of the Turin shroud. How could that? How can we, through technological means, make anything that's anything like that in any way? And what they found is that on a microscopic level, and to the extent that it does make visible changes as well, that using very short intensity, very short, highly intense bursts of ultraviolet laser, and this is down to billionths of a second, that these bursts from the laser that they do. But he said, if we were contemplating that if someone were to try and do this technologically, and remember that even the shroud skeptics think the image was there several centuries ago, but even if we were try to do it using 21st century technology, we would still need something like, more than thousands of billions of watts to do it, to form the whole image. And that's, for example, a higher wattage than you get in a nuclear power station, or it's just I would say that it's been demonstrated beyond any reasonable doubt that the image can't be produced by an artist or by technology of our current technology, and definitely not medieval technology.
But definitely natural means.
Yeah, well, again, coming back to that, yes. So if the fundamental state of existence that I was alluding to, that I think I'm drawn to by the evidence of looking at the nature of consciousness and so on, that the state of being one and limitless, and that is I believe our origin, and what Jesus referred to as his Father and our Father. That's the natural status of being, and we are have become less than that. So there is nothing that is supernatural. In that sense, I would say that if we say that all perception is extrasensory, as I was arguing, and all action is mind over matter, then what people usually call supernatural is just our normal everyday experience, but it's become subnatural, so that we don't even have that mustard seed capacity to do those things that he said that we are all capable of, as I say.
Thank you for that.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, I would agree. So, sometimes people like to avoid the use of the word supernatural for the reasons you say and stuff like that. I think the Bible's terminology would say it's a sign or a wonder and stuff like that. But okay, one thing I wanted to ask you, I have one follow up here about given your background in physics, because there are other theories. I'm sort of partial to Bob Rucker's hypothesis, where he has, in terms of the carbon dating, he relies on neutron absorption rather than an invisible reweave. And for the images, he has notion of charged particles. Are you familiar with Bob Rucker's hypothesis? Yes. And what's your take on that?
Yes, I am. But I mean, the thing is, there are samples that could be analyzed. If there were neutron bombardment, it would not only affect carbon, it would affect chlorine and several other elements. So I'm someone that wants to see the empirical evidence for a theory. So we have that from Dr. Di Lazzaro. We have that from people like Joe Marino, Dr. Lavoie, and so on. But the neutron bombardment is that I would like to see, evidence that if why not actually analyze the samples that they've got, and if they find that there is enrichment of these other isotopes other than carbon-14, then fine. But I just don't think that has been done.
Okay. And do you feel, in terms of image formation, do you feel the same way about his charged particles notion, like protons and stuff like that, creating the images? Is that unproven in your books as well, or?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it. For me, I don't think it doesn't fit together as a cogent explanation to be self-consistent. But I would, be happy to revise my opinion if they can provide empirical evidence.
Awesome. All right, cool. So I want to turn to a few questions I have gaining from your medical expertise, because obviously Shroud skeptics like to say, oh, the Shroud, it's totally anatomically inaccurate and that sort of thing. So in the first place, I just want to ask you, what is the evidence? How do we know that the Shroud Man is in fact anatomically accurate? And how do you respond to any inaccuracies, if there are any, in your view?
Well, basically, if you look at the inaccuracies that they claim, they don't actually measure up. Again, because I haven't actually done the specifically the work of doing the measurements myself, I have to direct people towards scholars who have done that. And again, Dr. Lavoie has done a lot of this. For example, people say the fingers are too long, but he has pointed out that the posture that we see there with the hand, sorry, I'm trying to find my my camera, with the hand sort of bent, with it's an optical illusion, and he actually did the measurements that demonstrate that. So that's what we call foreshortening of the palm or heel of the hand, because the angle between the forearm and the hand, and then you've got the angle between the hand and the fingers, so that the fingers are more closely approximating to the to the what anatomically we call the coronal plane, which is we have three planes in anatomy. You've got the transverse that goes flat. You've got if I remember correctly, it's the longitudinal one, the sagittal, sorry, that goes this way, sort of forwards and backwards, and then you've got the coronal plane that goes through the midline of the body between front and back, the body being straight is aligned in the coronal plane, and the cloth appears at the front and back to be parallel to that coronal plane, and the fingers are closer to the coronal plane in terms of their angular orientation than the palm or heel of the hand is. So there's foreshortening of the hand and an optical illusion of lengthening of the fingers, which Dr. Lavoie, not I, did the measurements. But I've looked at it and it makes sense, and you can actually do the measurements, repeat them by looking at the shroud and looking at the illustrations and so on that do actually bear it out as making sense. So they basically don't really have any actual evidence at all. I would argue that this is not anatomically correct.
Awesome. Okay. Well, here's something I've been looking forward to since you agreed to come on the show, and because I've had to kind of shut my mouth about it because it was up on SSG and that's private. But hey, you are one of the ones that was actually responding, so you can actually choose to share it. But it's your response to Hugh Ferry on the position of the nail wound. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to play a video clip of Hugh making his argument, saying that, well, based on the position of the nail, it's totally inaccurate historically. It's in the palm, it's not in the wrist. So I'm just going to play a 10-minute video clip if you don't mind.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, and then I'll have you respond to Hugh. And okay, share audio. Okay, are you guys seeing that?
Not yet.
Oh, Tyler, you need to put it up.
Yep. 1 second. There you go.
It's up. And
show of a hand.
Are you guys hearing that?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just play it through and then we'll come back.
It's my hand.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
put a red dot in the middle of it, where most
It's a lovely hand.
artists place their nails. Now I turn the hand over, but then reverse it, flip it horizontally so that it matches the first hand. This is the back of my hand, and I put some dots where my knuckles are, and I put a black dot in the middle of the back of the hand. Yeah. And now I'm going to put
Tracking.
those two hands on top of each other, showing where a nail through the front of the hand would emerge. And you'll be amazed. It's very, very close to the knuckles. Can you see my cursor?
Yeah.
Can you see the angle?
It is actually a lot closer than I'd have expected.
Can you
Yeah.
see the angle between those two knuckles there? Whereas if you put a dot on the back of the hand, the angle is here. Yeah? And if the
Mhm.
dot was anywhere near the wrist, the angle would be really steep, up there and back down to there. Do you follow the logic to this?
Yep. Right. So
Okay.
basically using the knuckles as a reference
There
point.
we are. So I get a little protractor and measure everything. This is where the angle would be if a nail was punched through the palm of the hand. This is where the nail would be if it was punched through basically the middle of the back of the hand. And this angle here would be where it would be if it was going through the wrist. Happy with that? I knew you'd love it. Here is the
I
shroud.
love numbers.
There are some knuckles, and there is the angle, 64 degrees. Now, is that more like 45 or 91? Well, it's about halfway. I would say it's about here. So the wound in the back in the shroud is too far forward, assuming that's it, than it would be if it was in the wrist. If it was in the wrist, it would have to be up here somewhere. There we go. There is 64 degrees, which is where the shroud wound actually is. there is 45 degrees, which is where it would be if it was in the wrist. Oh dear. Now, the next thing is that everybody, I don't think a single commentator that I've ever seen has looked at medieval pictures showing the back of the hand. We go on and on.
Why?
Huh?
Why do that? Why look at pictures? Just
We show pictures of the crucifixion, which has got the nail going through the palm of the hand, and we don't seem to notice that the shroud doesn't show the palm of the hand. It shows the back of the hand. But had we bothered, we could find some pictures, here they are, showing pictures of Jesus with wounds in the back of his hand. And then, oh, look at what we can do. We can measure where medieval people put the wounds when they drew them in the back of the hand. Between 50 and 60, there's a 70 there. There's a very big one here, 84. There are no wounds in the wrist drawn by medieval artists. They're all drawn roughly where they are there. And they're all very commensurate. 67 is exactly where the shroud wound is. This kind of logic tends to upset people. That's 45 degrees. That's where the wound would have to be if the nail went through the wrist. That's where it actually goes through. Happy with that?
So is the argument then that people are saying is that the shroud is actually depicting the wound going through the wrist, but when you actually look at it, it's not going through the wrist?
The shroud wound is not going through the wrist. It's going where most medieval depictors of the wound on the back of the hand actually put it. So you don't have to say, oh, it's very unrealistic. No medieval artist would have done this, that, and the other. Furthermore, there's more. You're going to love this. Robert Bucklin, following what's his name, Pierre Barbet. Pierre Barbet, bless him, found some corpses of very old, weak people and chopped their arms off. He actually nailed some people complete, but his account in his book, A Doctor at Calvary, shows that he chopped their arms off, nailed them to a plank of wood, and then hung weights from the arms. With the result that unless the weights were, unless the nails were through the wrists, the arms just tore out. But Fred Zugby, who was the who was a New York, Rockwell County, New York coroner's pathologist, he carried out lots more examples and said that the trouble with Barbet was that he used old, dead cadavers, whereas live young cadavers are much stronger. And he thought that you could easily nail people through the wrists and they through the palm of the hands, and the hands wouldn't tear out, especially if the feet were nailed. It wasn't just a question of hanging heavy weights from severed arms. If your feet are attached, they take a lot of the weight. So here again, we've got convinced shroudies, but disagreeing with each other.
Hopefully he didn't actually do these tests, right?
They did on dead people.
No,
Barbet did. Zugby didn't. No, he did crucify.
Yeah, because he was suggesting live.
Yeah, he crucified a lot of people, but only by tying them on. Right. Can we have a look at this?
So to summarize.
Oh, no, hang on.
Oh, sorry, you got something else to share?
See this. Okay. All right.
There we go.
So in everybody's hands, you can see the bones there of the hand. And in everybody's hand, the blue bone is longer than the yellow bone. Does that make sense to everybody? Have a look at your own hand. Yep. The bone between the wrist and the knuckle is longer than the bone between the top knuckle and the second joint down. Everyone can spot that just by looking at their hands. If we look at the shroud, we find that the blue line is slightly shorter than the yellow line. Oh, dearie me. So we can demonstrate that again, the blue line shows the wound actually in the middle of the hand, not anywhere near the wrists. Those two black dots are the famous space of Barbet and another possible nail site.
Okay, so I think you get the point. Those are some of the anatomical objections that the Shroud skeptic Hugh Ferry raised on this atheist show. And can you guys still hear me? Yeah, on the atheist show. And I know you were one of the ones that responded to this on SSG. So is there anything you want to share, since you were the author, to refute this? Or?
Firstly, I should say that the Shroud Science Group is a private forum, so I won't be sort of publicly stating what people have said on there, because I don't have their permission to do that. So, but all I can do is address the point that, so this isn't about SSG, but it's about what Hugh was saying there. And I mean, one thing I'll say in his defense is that he does seem to have the capacity to revise his opinions on things subject to new evidence. And again, I'm not going to refer to that's a general statement about him. I'm not going to talk about anything that he said or didn't say on SSG. But
just to be clear,
but I mean, I think he would probably. Sorry.
Sorry, just to be clear, I'm not asking you to reveal anything.
No, that's fine.
There's just your whatever you want to share from your.
Yeah. I think you would perhaps acknowledge that were the hand in a position such as the one it appears to be on the shroud, that one would expect there to be some foreshortening of the actual hand in between the wrist and the finger, so to speak, as actually, and again, this is there's a paper written by Dr. Lavoie on that people can access on shroud.com, where the actual measurements are there that demonstrate this foreshortening, and yeah, so I don't find the argument to say that the nail was in the hand. I'm not convinced by that for that reason. That to me, it actually does appear to be closer to what is, colloquially termed as the wrist.
Gotcha. And do you think, does that also explain the angles? Remember, he was showing like the angles of 67 degrees.
Well, yes. I mean, just sort of simple trigonometry. If you sort of you can try it. You'll see that the height of a triangle. But to take simply to put it to its to take the argument in the mathematical sense to the full extreme, if the hand is aligned at right angles to the plane, then it's foreshortened so much that all angles go to 180 degrees. You see, so it's 180 degrees when if the hand was completely flat, which means it's not an angle anymore, of course, and you can't actually distinguish the different points. But it's just simple basic high school level geometry to see that the angle that you measure will vary depending on the orientation of the hand within the plane of the shroud. Because what's easy to get confused about is that it's approximately a two-dimensional image that we see on the shroud, but it's an image of a three-dimensional person, it's again, getting sort of perhaps confused between the notion of a depiction of a hand, and so assuming it's going to be like that, but then it's actually more like this when you actually look at it more carefully. But I think it was an error. I think it was an honest error. I think it looks like this is what you believed to be the case from what he could see, but and I would say that it looks to me that the empirical evidence points to the bloodstain, and therefore the wound being in the wrist rather than the hand.
Awesome. Yeah. No, thank you so much for sharing your expertise on that, because that was an important issue that I think deserved a response. So, all right, cool. My last medical question before I turn it back to Tyler is so I've had Arif Khan on my show. He's a Ahmadiyya Muslim, but he's pro Shroud. He thinks it covered Jesus, and he's cited Muslim medical experts who studied the Shroud Man, and they say, well, look, yes, this is Jesus. This is anatomically accurate. This is a man, but not dead. This just proves that he swooned. There's nothing about the Shroud images that we can say, well, the Shroud Man is in fact dead. How do you respond to that objection?
Well, it's an interesting one. Of course, a lot of Christians are surprised that to know that in the Quran there are more references to Jesus' mother, who incidentally is believed by Muslims to have given birth to him as a virgin. There are actually more mentions of her in the Quran than there are of the Prophet Muhammad, and Jesus is very, of course, highly revered as one of their most important prophets, on a par with the Prophet Muhammad, and they actually believe he was the result of a virgin birth. They believe he healed the sick. They believe he taught people, and that what he taught was inspired by God, and so on. And again, they may accept the Shroud because, just like the Jews, they also the thing that if you go in a mosque or a synagogue, you won't find generally pictures of people or pictures of the people from the Bible and so on, because it's considered to place too much emphasis on images to be by those religions to be a form of idolatry. But because the evidence suggests that the Shroud image wasn't made by a human hand, then that wouldn't be a problem for them. I mean, yes, there are some people who believe that Jesus was still alive when the Shroud image formed, but as I say, the empirical and the forensic evidence suggests to me that he had already died at that point, and I've already explained one of the reasons why I believe that.
Awesome, cool, yeah. So Tyler, over to you. Do you have any follow-up questions about the Shroud of Turin and what we've been talking about?
Yeah, so not necessarily on the medical aspect of it, but I've listened to Dale now. I'm gonna say it's been about a year. I did not know. So Dale actually turned me into going from Shroud skeptic to, I think the Shroud at this point anyway is authentic. And so not only has Dale and his co-hosts, or not co-hosts, but his guests that have been on have convinced me of that, you've increased those that percentage for me, Dr. Silverman. So thank you for that, first and foremost. But I've heard now, and this might, I don't know if this trails off into conspiracy land, but I just wanted to ask you about this concept that it seems to be prevalent in Shroud communities where people talk about the Shroud a lot. This concept of a dual image on the Shroud. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about?
I am familiar with that concept, and I don't believe it's there. In the sense you mean the image on the reverse side. There have been. I went to a very interesting presentation by Dr. Paolo Di Lazzaro, where he was talking about. Trying to remember the word for it. Pareidolia is the word.
Okay.
Where it's like seeing faces in clouds and so on. And it's it doesn't apply to the image on the front of the shroud, which is clearly, even, you know, all the skeptics agree that there is an image of a man there. It's just what's under debate is how it got there.
Right.
But in terms of there being an image on when you actually look at it, I don't think it stands up. He showed that it was the example that he gave is that if you look at it in a certain way, in a certain light, and he was just being, you know, jocular, of course, joking, that but it's still there, that you can look at it in such a way and say, look, it spells out the letters ENEA, which is where the conference was, which was incidentally one of the most properly sort of peer reviewed of all of the conferences, and that was arranged by Dr. De Lazaro, and that was the one where I was very happy to have been one of the speakers there as well back in 2010, and yeah, so I think that's what it is. I think that this notion of the image on the back of the cloth, I'm not personally convinced. I have an open mind, and yeah, I'm happy to be convinced by evidence if I can be shown it. But as things stand, from what I've seen so far, I don't think it's there.
So now, Dale, real quick, is that the same thing? So with the eyes being open and you can see the mouth being open, is that are we talking about the same thing, or is that two different concepts?
That's different, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think Andrew Silverman, he's talking about like people like Dr. Giulio Fonte will say there's a double superficiality image of the face. But you're talking about some people have kind of said they can see like the Shroud Man like moving. So like he's got the closed mouth and closed eyes type thing, and then all of a sudden there's also an image of him with an open mouth.
Right.
And stuff.
Where you can like see his teeth and you can see his eyes open. That's what I was referring to.
Okay. I mean, the resolution of the image is actually not that fine. I personally haven't seen anything that has convinced me that there is movement visible on there. But in a sense there is. But in this sense that because we have a flat, probably horizontal corpse to start with, and then we have a vertically suspended. Yeah. So that movement, we can't see him moving, but we can see it by implication that he had moved to a different position when the image formed. But the image itself, to me, appears consistent with an instantaneous event, rather than a sort of like those flick book cartoons where we can see lots of different. That's from the evidence that I've seen so far.
Okay,
that's what I would say.
All right, awesome. And my last question then, and I think we have covered this. I don't know if you want to go into any more detail about it, but would you say that at this point anyway, given the evidence that we have, that it's possible, maybe plausible, I don't know if I would go probable or not, but just plausible at this point, that same light that we've been talking about throughout this discussion, did that the same light that the disciples saw on the Mount of Transfiguration or Mount Tabor, do you believe that light, this uncreated light that the East talks about, has something to do with the image that has been put on this cloth in any way, shape, or form?
I think it's the same. And it's the same light that people see in their near-death experiences. Yes, that in fact that's one of the how I try to tie things together in the book, and that it would make sense if, as I say, light is, if you like, the interface between the world of separation, time, space, and matter, and a world where there is no separation of points. Because if you could be a light beam, as it were, and not require physical flesh, you would be at your destination the same moment that you left your origin, and there would be no distance between them. And this
Wow.
isn't, I'm not speaking figuratively or symbolically. This is can be any, so anyone in high school who's familiar with Einstein's equations of special relativity can see that fits.
Okay, thank you so much, Dale. I think that's all the questions that I have.
All right, awesome. Yeah, well, I think that kind of covers all the bases. Let me ask you, Dr. Silverman, is there anything that we've missed that you think is really important from your book that we should discuss about?
Thank you. Thank you. That's very kind of you to ask that question. I think we started off by talking about consciousness and my contention that it can't be manufactured, and my contention that consciousness can't be reduced to a string of ones and zeros, and neither can a string of ones and zeros become conscious. And there's a disturbing trend in the world at the moment, from the natural towards the artificial, in the sense that people, can be quite visual, and people can see if they have an object that's shaped like a human being, and has a soft thing on it that looks like skin, they don't necessarily see the distinction between that, and they see, with all this, the virtual worlds that people are living in, and sort of not moving away from actual direct human contact with other human beings, and the move towards transhumanism, and even more scarily towards this notion of mind uploading. Okay, that this notion that your mind is just a collection of information. So the technological means for attempting to achieve immortality, if you like, is that people think that well, my mind is the software of my brain. Because my body and my brain is going to decay and die, why don't I, before that happens, put all that, if it were possible, put all the information that is the software, or the wiring that is contained within the wiring of the brain, just upload that to a machine and then dispose of the body, and I can exist forever in that machine. And of course, that's not you in that machine. That is not, and the machine isn't conscious, and you're not conscious as a machine. But you see, it's what's interesting to me is that people associate, perhaps, usually when people talk about the end of mankind and so on, people imagine the people who would talk about it, the end is near and all of that, to be people who are very religious and proselytizing and so on. But look at who is actually saying that they think that humanity's days may be numbered. It's mainstream scientists. People like Stephen Hawking said it when he was alive. The astronomer royal, Sir Martin Rees, has wrote a book called Our Final Century, and there are, at least in the UK, in the University of Oxford, they have something called the Future of Humanity Institute, and in the University of Cambridge there's the Centre for the Study of Existential Risk, of which Stephen Hawking was one of the members. And they, both of these organizations of eminent scientists, have come to the conclusion that if mankind is going to cease to be as a living species, one of the most likely ways that that will happen is through the unanticipated consequences of technology. Okay, and a lot of the people from those organizations have written books, and they give examples such as, okay, people develop some form of artificial intelligence and set it the task of getting rid of human suffering. Okay, this is quite an extreme example, but just to make the point. Now, to a machine, the most efficient way of getting rid of human suffering is to get rid of all humans. Right, either like wipe them all out, or anesthetize them on morphine drips, and then they're not suffering, because a machine can't understand. It can't know what a human being actually is, and you can't program that into it. You can't program information. I alluded to this earlier. There's no way of summarizing what consciousness is that could be understood by something that's not conscious, simply because something that's not conscious doesn't understand anything. And this is the point. That's why I give the example of an abacus, because a computer is no more than an abacus. It's just more complex, but it's the same principle. It's a processor of information. It's all ones and zeros, right? Just like the abacus beads are to the left or the right, and the computer is the same. It's just more ones and zeros, but nowhere, however long you make those ones and zeros, does it ever wake up and become someone rather than something. Now, Stephen Hawking and Martin Rees, I believe both of them have said independently that they think if we were to ever have contact with an extraterrestrial intelligence, they would expect we wouldn't be living organic beings. It would be machines, because once you develop advanced technology, the lifespan of what they call organic biological intelligence is very short, because you rapidly become redundant and replaced. Now, here, this is mainstream. This is two very eminent scientists saying something that I haven't heard, many other scientists actually cogently arguing against. And this is based on, what they have seen of what's happening in the world and so on. You would have thought that this is the sort of thing, there'd be people marching on the streets and so on, that these learned people are arguing a case, which I find quite compelling, that actually humanity may not have much longer if we continue as we are. If we continue our drift into ignorance of what is a human being, ignorance of the value of a human being as an oasis of sentience, consciousness, feeling, awareness, ability to make choices in this physical universe that you look out as far as you can see. Of course, we don't know. There may be other places out there, but what we see is where there is life. I don't know, but you see, these limitless numbers of galaxies with billions of stars, and those objects are all unfeeling, unperceiving, and here we are, these little human beings, this bags of cells that people see us as in the physical sense, and yet somehow associated with that body is this consciousness that logic and reason suggest to us is something eternal in this universe that had a beginning and will decay into nothing. So to me, I would say that's the most one of the most salient points actually in the book, is that people like Jesus, and not just Jesus, people like the Buddha, Prophet Muhammad, Abraham, Zoroaster, various Hindu sages, Guru Nanak from the Sikh, as a scholar from the and founder of the Sikh beliefs, that all of these people have been trying to tell us about the preciousness of humanity and why we should value ourselves and each other. And I believe that what we see on the Turin Shroud is evidence of that eternity of human sentience, and of being so much more than the dead body. I said NDE show that the brain stops and but the mind doesn't. What we see in the Shroud, I think, is evidence that a human being can achieve that state beyond all limit, beyond all restriction, beyond the prison of the self, to be able completely to love one's neighbor totally, and to recognize that the neighbor is the self, and through that, I think, what he was saying about him and his father being one and the same does make sense for anyone who fulfills that potential. In fact, he did say, that blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. And what is peace? What was he referring to? This peace that he was leaving with us? Well, the universe, the physical universe, is a universe of force. You have a tension when things are separated that is undone when you allow them to be one again. And that absence of force is peace. Love, you could say, is includes, and in some ways is defined by, respect for freedom, respect for the autonomy and independence of that individual. So you're not enforcing. Of course, I'm not saying that it. Obviously, in human life, it's not completely that, because people bring up children and they can't just let them do whatever they want. Of course, that's not what I'm saying, and there have to be limits. We can't allow people to harm other people and so on. But in terms of the principle that I'm saying of that, it's about the sense of everyone, of recognizing that everyone has a completely limitless potential. And I think that's what he taught, and it's what he achieved.
All right. So yeah, at this point, we do have a couple audience questions that I think you might find interesting. So the first one relates to consciousness, and this is from a skeptic, but he's a real seeker. I like him. He actually does his homework and stuff. And so he's asking, well, look, consciousness appears to just be this kind of an emergent property of the chemical and biological processes, which at their core are very simple. So it doesn't seem absurd to him that ones and zeros might evolve consciousness. What's your response to that? I know you.
Yes. Well, if you believe that consciousness, starting from the axiom or the assumption that consciousness is an emergent property of chemical and biological processes, then if you believe that that's the case, then you would think that. But it's like saying, it's information, it's consciousness. And so you write and the information that some of the information can be summarized. We say, our information that we have within us is our memories and so on. People keep a diary and they write down all their memories. And so the information is contained within that book. Is the book them? You see, the point is that it's the statement starts off by saying that it appears to be an emergent property of chemical and biological processes. If it were, of course, then NDEs couldn't happen, because the biological processes are stopping and the consciousness is continuing. And also, as I say, there's the arguments from what I was alluding to that Schrödinger pointed out, and that other scientists have as well, that there seems to be something missing in the physicist's notion of time. It wasn't talking about it in this context, perhaps about consciousness, but it also Lee Smolin in his book The Trouble with Physics says that there's something we seem to be missing about what time is, because the laws of physics have the beginning and end of the universe, and any time you like, all together. That you can draw a graph of the trajectory of a bouncing ball, and the origin and where it goes to, and everything in between is all there contained together. That's what science is telling us. And yet we empirically, in the sense of if you want to know about consciousness through empirical observation, well, you're conscious, so you can see empirically that there is a now. But where does that now come from, except through being conscious of it? And so here's the point, that consciousness makes the now, and therefore without it there would be no time. And actually there's one of the world's leading physicists at the moment in San Francisco at the Stanford University. He pointed out, and he actually wrote this in his textbook on inflationary cosmology, that the evidence, looking at the whole physical universe, okay, you can if you mentioned earlier the quantum wave function. Well, you could have, and there is something that cosmologists talk about as the wave function for the whole universe. They call it the Wheeler-DeWitt wave function. Okay. Now, what he pointed out is that the thing about the quantum wave function is that the change, the rate of change in terms of time is proportional to energy. Okay. But the thing about the universe, when you consider the universe as a whole, it actually does fit with the law of conservation of energy, in the sense that the total energy of the universe is zero, because the energy is exactly cancelled out by the gravitational energy, which to all intents and purposes is negative. So the universe comes from zero, and it's still zero in terms of its total energy. But if the total energy is zero, then the rate of change is zero. Nothing happens. You have a dead static universe where nothing ever happens. And then he made the realization that actually what brings that to life is that the observer is there. And he pointed out, this is an interesting interview you can find on YouTube, called a site called Close to Truth, when he was interviewed about it. He said that take me, for example. He said that if I'm, say, for example, a 70-kilogram man, and I'm observing the universe, then because I have plus 70 kilograms and the total energy of the universe is zero, the rest of the universe has minus 70 kilograms, effectively, all things being taken into consideration. And therefore it can change, because you take yourself out of, separate from the rest of the universe by being an observer. And he, from that point of argument, came to the conclusion that it's actually consciousness that brings the universe to life, in a sense that we as conscious beings are the creators of physical reality. And so if that being the case, if as quantum theory shows, there is no physicality without consciousness, then consciousness can't be an emergent property of physical things.
All right. So this one, so this is from Mr. Trousers, and I'm trying to figure out a way to, because I don't understand exactly what he's getting at here, but
can I just say I love that guy's name, by the way?
It is a good one, yeah.
That's good, yeah.
So he's saying, look, I don't like what the Shroud would prove, but I do like what it implies. You can't prove anything 100%. So let me just kind of generalize it. Like, if people don't like the implications or what the Shroud evidence proves, like what should they do with the evidence or something?
Okay, my impression of reading what Mr. Charles has written there is not quite that. I think he's raising a valid point. Actually, he does like what it implies, he says, but he's making the point that the evidence doesn't prove anything sort of 100%, that we always, and I think I would always want to keep an open mind, but I would say that the one exception to what can't be proven is that you can prove to yourself that you exist. Okay, so that's the fundamental bedrock, I think, or I perceive, therefore I am. And that's where I start everything from in the book, because I would argue that that is undeniable. You can say, oh, yes, but it's all an illusion. But there has to be a perceiver for there to be an illusion. So it's I think, not just beyond reasonable doubt, but just beyond doubt to any thinker that they exist. And I would just start from there. And to me, the Shroud is a useful piece of empirical evidence, but there is nothing ever final in anything that is an object. But all I can say is that on current evidence that I have seen, I also like what the Shroud implies. To take Mr. Charles's point, it's not 100% proof. Fair enough. But the evidence so far, no one has, at least to my satisfaction, been able to demonstrate that it's not true.
All right, awesome. All right, cool. Well, yeah, I think that's it. Tyler, I don't know if you have any last questions, or are you happy with how it went?
I'm pleased, as Josh would say. So absolutely. No, thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule, Dr. Silverman, to come on with us and engage us a little bit and answer our questions. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you very much for having me on the show. I've greatly enjoyed, and it's been very educational as well to talk with you both. Thank you very much, and I'm grateful to the viewers for their questions and comments.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you just before we close out, why don't you go ahead and plug your book and also your websites just for people as well?
Okay. My book is A Burst of Conscious Light. It is it's distributed by what are they called? Simon & Schuster, and you can access it through ordering it at bookshops, or it's available on Amazon. There's information on my website about it, andrewsilverman.co.uk, and I also have a website, lightoftheshroud.com.
Dr. Silverman, real quick, just a quick question, follow-up question to what you just said, actually. Where can I get a signed copy at? I'll just play it.
I will say he was good enough. I did get a free copy. It's not signed, but I got a free copy. So yeah.
Hey, I don't mind paying for it as long as I can get a signed copy. I'll be good.
I think if it's signed, it's going to be from me, so I won't let you pay for it. But I'm happy to post you one if you want it. I mean, I don't think my signature adds any value to it. But no, I'd be more than happy to send you one if you give me your details.
Absolutely. I can send you my email through Dell, and then we can engage. I'll give you my address. So okay. Yeah, absolutely. I'd love that. Given that I'm exploring orthodoxy and they have this concept of this uncreated light phenomena, I want to kind of compare what you've written about it to what they have said about it. So yeah, I'd love to read your book.
Oh, thank you. It'd be a pleasure to send it to you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Well, yeah, that's it. So just so the audience knows what's coming up next. So tonight at 7 p.m., David Russell is organizing the show with Travis Worth and the Faithiest Atheist on what's the value of disagreement? Is that, disagreement, surely that's bad, right? Well, nope. Travis thinks there might be some value in it. So yeah, look forward to that, and have a great day, everyone.
Thanks very much.